Thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As many of us begin to approach midlife and the kids start to move out of the house and finish college and go on to careers, relationships, and begin families, we begin to find those walls widen and the rooms feeling empty, and as we look at our partner, we start to think to ourselves, what next? On the program today, we're going to be talking about relationships and the importance of growing, not just emotionally, but spiritually, perhaps with our partner. And maybe you might not be having such things as empty nest syndrome, but some other things may come on the horizon that kind of make you question whether or not you would rather continue a relationship or you'd like to see it grow and develop to see what comes next. On our program today, we'll be talking with someone who's been a full-time psychotherapist for more than 30 years. He's logged over more than 50,000 therapy hours with people from all over the place. And since he began his practice, he has received advanced certifications in Imago relationship therapy, Gestalt therapy, and neurolinguistic programming. He's also been interviewed extensively on television, print, and radio. And we're going to be talking about the book, Togetherness, Creating and Deepening Sustainable Love. And I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Mr. Andy Wald. Andy, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, this is always one of those topics, that as you do it over and over and over enough, you realize, there's no really simple, easy, cookie-cutter solutions. It really seems pretty diverse. Tell us about your experience with this.
With cookie-cutter solutions?
With any of it.
Okay. Well, let me tell you about the book, and that will introduce this for you. The book really says that, and I've noticed this through the years, that love really is achievable. Some people feel that they would like to give up, but if they hang in there and understand more that love is achievable at any stage of relationship, whether they're looking for one, whether they're in one and they want to deepen it, or they're ending one, that there is certainly reason to hope. Never before, by the way, has there been such interest that I've noticed in my 38 years working as a therapist about how relationships work. And I think one of the reasons for that, Daniel, is that we live in this very fast-paced world where everything is done fast with supercomputers. There's a computer out there now that I was reading about that takes care, that looks into weather and weather predictions, and it makes over several billion calculations per second. And I think that's emblematic of our life and the way we live, that everything is geared for speed. However, relationships are not. The ones that begin fast often end fast. The relationships that last need to adjust to being on a slower, different pace. Relationships with depth take time, and the most important thing, Daniel, with regards to that, is patience. People need to feel patient in their relationship, and there's too much, what I see in my work, too much reaction versus reflection. People are very quick to judge, and they become reactive quickly, and that leads to arguments, instead of taking their time, having patience, and being reflective. I have this one client that I just started to see who has a boyfriend who wants her to fall in love with him right away. And she's had a bad history of relationships in herself and her family. It's going to take time and patience, which he needs to acquire. So he needs to slow down and give the benefit of the doubt. This book, Togetherness, shows how to break old patterns that don't work, create new ones that will. For instance, I have one client, Daniel, that feels that he tries to improve his wife, and he does so by telling her how, this is an amazing thing, how to load the dishwasher correctly. which, by the way, is something that I hear a lot for some reason. There's a lot of controversy in couples on how to load the dishwasher. And she, instead of taking it in any kind of positive way, she sees it as criticism and then pushes him away, and he wonders, can't understand why she would do that when he's trying to be so helpful. So we have to be very careful about that, and the book shows how to break some of those patterns and create new ones that work much, much better.
You know, relationship can be such a tricky thing, and, you know, as you were saying earlier, when you talk about the supercomputer that's able to look in and make billions of calculations and so forth, you know, that the first thing that came to mind when you were talking about that was certainty. And it seems that we have sort of bought into the fairy tale that we've heard since children, that as we're rescued and as the right two people come together, there is the certainty of living happily ever after. And I guess I was kind of one of those strange kids as I got older, and I thought to myself, okay, as you watch the 20-minute sitcom where the problem arises, they solve it, aren't we better people for all this? And, you know, we hold each other and think, okay, we've learned from this, great. Or, you know, the marriage that happens where they come together and they profess their love and they get married and they go off on their honeymoon, and I think to myself, okay, so what about the next day?
Exactly.
And the day after that,
exactly.
and the day after that. What does happily ever after really mean?
It needs a lot of work.
When the fact is that as humans, we're not meant to be, or it's not possible to sustain happiness every minute of every day of our lives. You know, that we're going to have downs and ups and downs and ups.
Absolutely, and we have to ride that out. It's funny you were talking about those fairy tales, you know, like with Prince Charming, and you're absolutely right. They end the movie riding off into the sunset, and they don't really talk about what the next day is going to bring, you know, where they're going to live and who their friends are going to be. Yeah. And it's often a very a big problem. I think that it's not so much a matter of choice, it's a matter of execution in creating a relationship that works, and that it is really important that a couple be mindful of the relationship every day, that they ask themselves in a conscious way, what can I do today to enhance and nurture this relationship? And there's this, unfortunately, this problem with neglect, and that I was looking into this statistic, an interesting statistic, Daniel, that with frequency of divorce and years of marriage. And what it was showing is that in the first 5 years of marriage, there's a high degree of divorce. And then it levels off, and then it grows again, very high again, around 20 to 24 years of marriage.
Wow.
And
this is pretty consistent for the most part that you found?
Yeah, this is a longevity study that was done, and they were asking, and they were wondering why that was. And the conclusion was interesting. It is when the kids leave home and there's an empty nest. What happens in many cases is that when parents have kids, they give up the couple in lieu of the family. And then the family becomes the unit. Actually, I wrote a paper about this called When Baby Makes Three, that you can never give up on the couple. So what happens is that the kids leave home, and the parents are sitting there looking at each other, wondering, well, who are you? Who are we without kids? We don't have an identity. That's why it's so imperative for couples to continue to nurture and nourish their relationship all during their relationship, whether they have kids or not. And that neglect is one of the major factors for divorce.
You know, and I was just talking about that too, you know, and sometimes even during the time that you have children, you find divorces happen, and they tend to happen actually early in a child's relationship, between the ages of, say, birth and 2 years old.
That's right.
So that's kind of interesting that you have it on two far spectrums. There's the time when they first come into the world
right.
that divorce could happen, and then there's the time that's imminent when they go to leave the home. But in between, there seems to be some stability there. That's kind of interesting.
There's a great devotion to the family, and a lot of families stay together when they wouldn't ordinarily because they want to stay together for the children. And so they do by hook or by crook. By the way, I was going to mention that about my book that there's a major tenet of the book I wanted to mention. Is that all right?
That's fine. Sure.
Oh, yeah. That we felt, my co-author Cindy Dale and I, that the desire for connection is irrepressible in us. That we're wired for it. And it's interesting because we must be wired because almost 100% of the time, all relationships end up tragically. It ends up in divorce or death. So why is it that love is so compelling? And the reason is that the heart wants to feel alive.
Right.
And the heart is enlivened, that love enlivens the heart. And without the loving connection, very often there's this fear, and it's the fear of non-existence or the fear of death. And I'm not talking just with a soulmate, by the way, that we emphasize in the book the importance of different kinds of connections. Connections like, we can talk about it in a little bit, connection with oneself, and connection with family, relatives, friends, community, and the divine. So all of those are important.
It's interesting you should say that. I'm reminded of the movie The Mirror Has Two Faces, Barbra Streisand.
Okay.
And she is someone who, I guess, teaches a course in love or romance. I can't remember what it is. Anyway, she says almost that very thing, and she's, talking about love and the feeling of being in love. And she goes on to, as she's doing the quick lecture to the class, well, if we know that it never lasts, why do we buy into it so much?
Exactly.
When we know that inevitably we're going to feel pain, we're going to feel heartbreak, we're going to feel depression. These aren't verbatims, but, she says this to the class, and it was funny because at the time I was kind of feeling sort of a little bit of heartbreak in a relationship that kind of went sour. It was inevitable. But anyway, so I'm watching this, and I'm like, yeah, why do we? Because, it feels painful on the other side when it doesn't work out. And she says, because while it does last, it feels frickin' great.
That's right.
And she's absolutely right. There is just almost no better feeling in the world.
And we can't help ourselves.
Right.
We're just wired that way.
And why do you think that is?
I think that's part of being human.
Right.
I can't think of any other reason. We're just genetically geared for it. So we have to go with it. And you're absolutely right, Daniel, that it is. It's so compelling. It feels so good when you're in it. It's almost addictive. We want it. We want to feel that. And there's another reason, by the way, that love and relationships are important. You spurred the thought on for me, and that is that when a relationship lasts for a while, the person we're having the relationship with becomes the historian of our life, and because they've witnessed what's gone on in our life. And when we have a historian that's been with us and watching us, that feels good. It feels very validating. It feels like our life has been worthwhile, and there's somebody that remembers us and knows us. And that's another reason why I think love is compelling over time, particularly.
Now, in your book, you talk about, for instance, as we were mentioning earlier, that we tend to buy into the fairy tale ideal of relationship. And you give the example of Guinevere and Lancelot or Romeo and Juliet, and here were these lovers that basically had their feet in the clouds. And you said, well, in reality, what we need to have There's one foot in the clouds, the other foot grounded on Earth.
They had their heads in the clouds. I don't know about their feet.
Yeah. Well, with Romeo and Juliet, you could certainly understand. I mean, what were they, like 13 and 14 years old? That's how, kids that age would be, actually.
That's right.
But,
that's right.
After a couple of divorces and some kids, I'm sure they wouldn't be so professive and really,
Some people still are, but you're right.
But, the importance here that we're talking about is staying grounded. Now, what does that really look like, so to speak?
It's really about practicality.
Without taking the fun away from things, so to speak.
Well, yeah, but you really have to have both. You have to have, it's fun to have your heads in the clouds, but the other part of it is the practicality of a relationship in that where are we going to live? How are we going to pay the bills? How can we, and this is the key, how are we going to work as a team and make this life work? How are we going to pay the mortgage? What are we going to eat? Who are our friends going to be? Questions like that, Romeo and Juliet would never ask themselves. They hadn't gotten to that point. But a lot of people never do either. They are just caught up in the rapture of a relationship and without the practicality. You have to have both for a relationship to work. You really have to be able to work as a team. And when you work as a team, by the way, it's important that as teammates, you have equal amount of say, and if you have a difference of opinion, that you work towards consensus to find an answer. I have a saying that I made up, Daniel, that a measure of a good relationship is not just how well you get along, but how well you can resolve your differences. And everybody has differences. And by the way, I had a speaking of that, I had a person come in. Interesting. She came in with her new fiance. She was telling me that she had been married 10 years and never had one argument with her husband until the day she left.
Wow.
Yeah, and she was brought up that you go along to get along. So you just give up yourself. You have no boundaries. We can talk about boundaries also, but whatever he wanted was fine, and she finally recognized that it wasn't fine for her, and she left.
Well, she probably recognized that, I would think, through the course of time, just by how she was feeling on the inside, wouldn't you think?
Absolutely. Okay. It finally caught up to her. Yeah, you can't, you really have to have a marriage between your head and your heart, and she did not.
Now, let's talk about boundaries. I mean, this is very important because what we all do need to have, as much as we are hardwired to have connection to someone else, is that we also need our autonomy as well. And I've seen relationships where that autonomy for one or the other just doesn't exist at all, and you can almost feel in their energy that they've sort of either had a slow death or they just seem dead. And it's sad, but then they go about the day with the smile, acting as though everything is okay, but you just, you instinctively just know it's not really the case.
Right. You see these enmeshed couples that you can't tell one from another. That does happen, and it often catches up to them. A couple without boundaries is a problem because you end up running into rejection without realizing it. I think, Daniel, boundaries, I think, are really misunderstood a lot. People tend to see boundaries as a keep-out sign, that, it's like no trespassing, no right turn, no smoking, and it's really not meant to be that way. There are bad boundaries. There are unhealthy boundaries we can talk about, but what I'm talking about are healthy kinds of boundaries. And when you can define the boundaries, your own boundaries, it defines who you are and how you want to be treated.
Right.
It basically says, look, we have things in common, but we also have things that are different. In the beginning of a relationship, we're all fooled thinking we have everything in common. That's all you get attracted to. As the stage of infatuation wears off, and it always does, you realize how different we are, and that's okay.
Or that thing you loved about somebody else tends to drive you nuts now.
That's right. It's exactly right. And then how are we going to deal with it? So this, recognizing that we're different is essential, and it's important to convey to your partner those boundaries, but not in a vitriolic kind of way, but with compassion. Saying no, and it's important that you say no to an event, not a relationship, not the relationship. And sometimes, and particularly this interesting statistic, particularly for wives, there was a study done, and 60% of wives/mothers felt that they did not have enough time for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So creating a boundary that says, I need more time for myself is perfectly legitimate, as long as you work it out well and do it compassionately with your partner. For instance, it's okay to say, I'm not going to go to your mother and father's house for dinner for the third time this week. I'm going to take some time for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I have a classic story for you about boundaries. It's a personal story that illustrates exactly what I'm talking about. It happened to me. I've been married for now 39 years, and when we first, my wife and I first got married, I was 23, she was 22, and we were poor, just starting out, and I was in graduate school actually at the time. And so what we did for entertainment is we bought bicycles, and we would ride bicycles around the neighborhood. And I have to tell you that our relationship was one in which it was mostly a long-distance relationship. So by the time we got married, we really didn't know each other that well.
Right.
Still, we talked on the phone a lot, but we didn't spend much time together, one-to-one. So keep that in mind. So we're riding along, and my wife goes up sideways on a curb and falls. And I do what I thought was the gallant thing to do, and I jump off my bike, and I run over to her to console her and give her love and kisses. And before I get there, she holds up her hand, and she fairly sternly says, "Stay away." And being 23, I had no idea what to do with this. I had no way to compute it. I was nonplussed by this. So I did what a typical 23-year-old would do. I jumped on my bike and rode off in a huff. I was going to show her what rejection felt like, and give her a taste of her own medicine. Fortunately, that night we were able to talk. And in talking, my wife told me, her name is Tess, and she grew up in a farm in Iowa, where her closest neighbor was a mile and a half away, and she was an only child for 12 years. I grew up in an affluent community north of Chicago where people were all around.
Mm-hmm.
So she told me that when she was playing and fell off out of one of the only trees in Iowa and hurt herself, that was probably uncalled for to call the trees, but there aren't, where she lived, there weren't very many. And when she fell, there was nobody around to help her.
Mm-hmm.
So she learned that where she grew up, one takes care of themselves. And I think I mentioned her closest sibling was 12 years younger also. So she had a lot of time by herself. And when she told me that, I melted, because I then didn't take it personally. It wasn't really about me. It was about who she was. And from that, we were able to talk that, I grew up differently, where if I got hurt, I had all these people coming around to console me. And so we talked about, what would be a compromise, what would work for her, what would work for me. And this is also a key to be able to stretch yourself in the other person's direction.
Right.
So, she actually fell one other time, and she told me what I could do is from a distance ask if she was all right, and I did that, even though every part of me wanted to jump off my bike and run over there. So she thanked me later for doing that. And when I get sick, by the way, I want her coming in every 5 minutes asking me how I'm doing and if I need anything. And she's now, and what she would want is for me to close the door and check on her the next day. So I've gotten better. I come in, 3-4 times a day, and she's gotten better because she comes in about every half hour instead of every, the next day. I still think she's a little late, but it's, I give her credit. It's much, much better. And so we've reached, a very workable compromise. Actually, through the years, we've gotten much, much closer to being similar in terms of what we want. But that's an example of boundaries and how to work with them. And, if you can do it compassionately. Some women, particularly women, I should say, and there are men that do this too. I shouldn't just say women, but it's majority women, have been brought up to always say yes, no matter what. And then they lose their sense of identity of who they are. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't, after a while, that will catch up to you, and it becomes a problem. Then there are what I was starting to talk about that are unhealthy boundaries. And unhealthy boundaries, by the way, before I get to that, there are also boundaries, this is important, boundaries that couples have together. As a couple, for instance, I have a couple that just visited the husband's parents out west, and his mother is fairly intrusive, so they created a boundary. Instead of staying at their house, they got a hotel, and they would decide when and where they were going and how long they would meet with the mother-in-law, and they create a couple boundary. And I think doing that is really important. People talk about who they're going to see and how often.
Right.
That's important because that's teamwork.
And there's an important one too as couples get together. As you get the parents, and they tend to try to come in. At least that's the general experience. Is they try to be influential. They think they're doing, the honorable, nice, noble thing. And I remember years ago as I got together with my partner, and she was not working at the time or bringing in any type of income at the moment. There was something I knew in her once she settled that she would be on fire. That it was just something I knew. And I couldn't believe that my own mother had called. And she says to me, literally on the phone, she needs to go out and get a job. And I sat there for a minute, and I was like, if my mother was in front of me, I might have slapped her right upside the head.
It's good you're reflective and not...
Exactly. So I sat there for a moment, and I listened to this, and I said, well, I'll tell you what. Here's the deal. She lives with me. We're doing just fine. You let me and her worry about what she's doing right now. And you mind your own business. And, I guess it was, like this partner of yours, I was raised throughout my life where I got in trouble, I got myself out of it. Nobody really helped me out a whole lot. So I was raised to be independent, fiercely so. And so now, here she steps in trying to say these things. And it's like, look, you always made me, or I was raised to believe for the most part, that by the time I was 18 years old, I would be out doing my own thing. That was just the way it was, okay? And I've sustained myself pretty much ever since.
Yeah.
I'm not going to have you tell me that I need to leave the house, and then you're going to tell me how to live, because I'm going to tell you to shut your mouth, and that includes any relationships I'm in. Not that I don't love you and I won't listen and maybe even heed some of your advice, but that's the way it's going to work. So I can see where boundaries, are very important.
I have a question. How did that work out for you?
How's that?
Telling your mom that.
Well, my mother and I always had a good relationship as, friends, and it was just fine.
Okay. Some mothers would take quite offense to that in the delivery.
Right.
But if you have that kind of relationship and you can get away with that, that's great.
Yeah. No, it was, it wasn't harsh. I was very nice and loving and tactful, just she's doing just fine. Don't worry about it. We'll take care of business.
Good. Yeah, the delivery is important.
Isn't that true?
As well as the message.
Now, just to let people know about this book, Togetherness, there are a lot of books out there that tend to have, for instance, what is the right partner? Let's take a test. Get to know yourself, and there's all these little digs and tests and things.
Yeah, forget it.
What I really enjoy about this book, just to let people know, is that you get this feeling that these are meditative reflections that really get more personal to an individual rather than having a couple read, although they could read it together, but they could both reflect and feel and sense similarities of awe while at the same time embracing those differences and similarities and coming together and saying, let's experiment and pay attention to this more. So it breathes almost a poetic sense to it, I guess.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we were hoping to convey that. Yeah, I think it is about working together. It's about working on yourself. Mm-hmm. Particularly, I think you were kind of referring to that with the different meditations and reflective moments.
I mean, how many togetherness or relationship books do you use an analogy of kidneys, for instance?
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I do want to talk about that. Let me just, if it's all right with you, just finish with boundaries.
Yes, please.
Because I started to talk about unhealthy boundaries, and there are, and really it's important to understand what unhealthy boundaries are. And basically, an unhealthy boundary is really saying no to the relationship. When you find yourself having vicious arguments, or when you exit, I call them exits, do things to avoid the relationship. Believe it or not, I had a client once that meditated 6 hours a day, and I think some of that had caused, some of that was avoidance. Or what I have seen also is people, this is often husbands, I see this, where they will jog. They're really into jogging. Go jogging 2-3 hours, getting ready for a marathon, and then they come home and they're too tired to do anything but go to bed, have something to eat and go to bed. And they either are afraid or they choose not to have a relationship, a conversation with their significant other. That really is telling you that there is a major problem. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you'll see parents that will choose activities with the kids and not with the spouse, and we've talked about what can happen there. There are all kinds of exits. There was one exit that I know about where this woman, it sounded very altruistic. She would spend all her spare time in church doing church activities, and in doing that, she was avoiding interaction with her husband. So there are lots of avoidance techniques. One way to tell, by the way, that your relationship is creating unhealthy boundaries is in the area of sex. That if you're if what is normal has become abnormal, in other words, if you had a certain pattern of sexual contact and that has dropped off significantly, there's usually a problem that's not being addressed. What goes on outside the bedroom gets reflected in the bedroom, basically.
Right, okay.
Certainly as you get older, things shift, but that's more on a slower basis. Also, it's important to recognize that there's a big difference between men and women regarding sex and connection. Men tend to use sex as a way of connecting. If there's a problem, we want to connect by having sex. Women are very different. They want to connect first outside the bedroom and then celebrate that connection inside the bedroom.
Okay.
So that it's a good measure what's going on sexually is a measure of how the relationship is going, and you can tell. It's pretty evident. And then you have to take a look at what is not being talked about. What are we avoiding? And can we find a voice, a way to talk about things that were not hadn't been talked about before? And the way to do that, by the way, is to keep these three things in mind: no criticism, shame, or blame. They are three things that have no place in a relationship in any way. There's so many better ways to talk about things other than criticism. Some people, and there's no such thing as constructive criticism, by the way. I think that's baloney.
Criticism is just criticism.
Yeah. Unless somebody asks, can you critique this, there's no way. The way to do that is to personalize it, to describe a person's behavior, and then let them know what you feel as a result of it. In other words, own it. For instance, when you are late picking me up, I feel uncared for. I feel neglected. Those statements are inarguable. If you go to criticism, like you jerk, you're careless, you don't care, those kinds of things are a setup for defensiveness, and people will defend themselves, and then you're off to the races, and nothing good can follow. So no criticism, shame, or blame. Own your feelings, describe the behavior, and tell how it makes you feel, or how you end up feeling. And nobody makes you feel anything. We do that to ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating stuff. Togetherness is the book. Creating and Deepening Sustainable Love is the book that we're talking about here today. Again, like I said, what made you bring or put the book together the way that you did? Did you just figure, I'm going to jump off the path here and give people some real meat to reflect on versus, the other kinds of things that you see out there?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Cindy and I got together. I've known her for about 15 years. And she comes from a very spiritual bent, and I'm from the psychological world. And as we were talking, we realized and recognized that there was a lot in common, and that there was a book that needed to be written that described how people can have better relationships. And it's not just a how-to book. There are a lot of how-to books,
right.
A, B, C. This is much more reflective. This is much more spiritual. It talks about how you need to love yourself first, and how to do that, how to forgive and move on. So it's a real different take. And as we were talking about each of our philosophies, we recognized how similar they were, and thought, gee, there's a book here. By the way, this is Cindy's 16th book.
Okay.
First one she's co-written, and it's my first book. I actually have a children's book waiting in the wings, but this is my first published book. So we had a good time, and we were, the biggest thing was to try to find a voice that would reflect us, and we had the hardest time doing that in the beginning. And then we got help with this Deborah Evans, who has written and helped write books for people like Wayne Dyer and Deepak Chopra, Marianne Williamson. And she was really very instrumental in helping us find our voice for this book that is, a blend of psychology and spiritual, energetic.
Yeah, very exciting stuff. It also helps people to understand their personal responsibility when it comes to relationships, as you talk about in your book, that a lot of times, too, we tend to project sort of those little beliefs or those things within inside of ourselves, and we get triggered, and then we project that onto someone else, and the first person tends to be our partner. And you talk about how you can come to recognize these things and work through them, because relationships, especially with other people, become our greatest mirrors to the inside of ourselves.
That's correct.
And, how do you suggest or give some suggestions on how people can work through those things where you can kind of look and go, I don't know where this is coming from, honey. I love you like crazy, but, what step do we take from here?
Yeah, well, there's a variety of ways. If something is getting triggered, then you need to look at yourself. Where is this coming from?
Mm-hmm.
Where in my family have I felt this before? Am I playing something out? I just had a person recently who came in, and he has these issues with authority and anger. He had no idea where it was coming from,
mm-hmm.
and recognized that it wasn't him that had he wasn't punished or criticized, but he observed that his father would degrade his mother,
mm-hmm.
and his mother never stood up for herself. So he took on that energetically and has felt that now and said to himself, basically, I'm not going to have that be done to me. So his awareness of that helped him understand that he was playing that out, projecting, as you were saying, onto his wife, and to recognize that his wife wasn't his father or mother. And in owning that and recognizing it, he has been able to catch himself as
mm-hmm.
that happens. There's another piece that you were alluding to that's interesting that people run into, and that is the issue of reasonableness. And that is that we all think that we are reasonable. And
boy, if you only knew.
Yeah, right. And not only do we think that we are all reasonable, but we think everybody else should have our sense of reasonableness simply because we're so reasonable.
Right.
And there we run into a lot of problems because everybody is different and have different sense of reasonableness. And I see this a lot where, in fact, there's this couple I see now where he feels that his wife should get a job and bring in income so he wouldn't have to work as hard. And she, does what she does, works sort of independently, but doesn't have insurance. And that's reasonable for him, and what she does is reasonable for her.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really important to recognize that we're different.
Right.
And we all have our sense of reasonableness. By the way, just as an aside, I saw a man for 20 years who was schizophrenic, and he heard voices. And the voices were inside his head, and even with medication, it didn't help. So we were talking about it one day. He had two voices. He called the devils inside. We were talking one day, and I told him that I didn't hear voices, and he couldn't believe me. He thought he was pretty reasonable,
right.
And that everybody heard voices, since he did. I mean, that's an extreme example, but I think all of us have versions of that. So what do we do with it, you ask? One is to finish the unfinished business with our family of origin. A lot of our book talks a bit about that,
mm-hmm.
that stuff that we had played out in our lives, how can we deal with that? There's an exercise in the book, I'm not sure if you saw it, of healing the child within. All of us have wounded children in us. Let me back up for a second on this and explain. Do you ever remember a movie called 1,000 Clowns?
I know the title, but I haven't seen it.
Okay, so this is a movie that was in 1965,
mm-hmm.
Jason Robards. And in it, Jason Robards is talking about when you go to a circus and you see a little car putt around, it stops, the doors fly open, and out pour 1,000 clowns.
Mm-hmm.
That's our mind.
Right.
We have 1,000 different clowns. We call them sometimes ego states or adaptive behaviors, and sometimes they are wounded, and they end up showing up a lot and running the show. and through anger, like a little child anger. If we don't get what we want, or if we feel like somebody's treated us unjustly, and it's not good to have a child in the driver's seat.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an exercise in the book of how to deal with that, and essentially what it is, and it's a little bit more detailed in the book, and I do this in my office, is to close your eyes and quietly find a nice, peaceful, tranquil place, and then from a distance see this person approaching, and it's you as a child at a time when things were rough, and have the child talk to you, the adult, and tell you what life is like in first person, and then have the parent who's listening really be empathetic and compassionate, and then end up holding the child, and then bringing the child inside them, in their heart, and then make contact with them, and various times contact that child within, and that can be very soothing and healing for that ego state, if you will, that child. So there are ways to heal the inner child, which is really very important as a way of dealing with how to make relationships better.
Yeah, fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for being on the program. Again, I couldn't say to people enough, Togetherness, your book here, is certainly worth having just because it isn't something you read through, as you said. It's certainly not a how-to book, but it's more of a book, as you mentioned earlier in the program very adamantly. It's more of reflection, that we don't spend enough time reflecting. We spend most of our time reacting.
Exactly.
So see, folks, you can stay in the same letter of the alphabet. You don't have to stretch far to really change your experience.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, Andy, do you have a website people can find out more?
Sure. It's andrewwald.com.
Okay.
And by the way, you can get this book at Barnes & Noble or Amazon website.
That sounds wonderful. Do you have a project coming up in the wings?
I do. I'm in the process of talking to my publisher. I don't know when it's going to happen, but I have a children's book coming out. Currently it's called Pals, and hopefully you'll be seeing it on the bookshelf probably sometime early next year.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Andrew, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Well, thank you for having me.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. Again, the book is Togetherness. Our guest today, Andrew Wald. You can also be sure to visit us at our website, where we will have a hot link on that for you as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. Remember, live your day past halfway.